Hey everyone, it's time to Nefis and Chill. Well, you guys wanted more communication from the developers, or at least some responses from them, after they asked how they could communicate more. Well, here's one instance of it in regards to the Update 33 combat preview, post the PTS cycle week 1 for Ascending Tide DLC. So this is ZOS combat developer Gilliam following up on the Update 33 combat preview thread, where he replies basically to the concerns voiced by a lot of people on this forum thread. So I'll read this out loud and explain, I guess, or kind of give my thoughts on it. Greetings, everyone. We've been closely monitoring the feedback and discussion surrounding the Update 33 combat preview, and have taken note of a few reoccurring bits that we'd like to take some time to address. Particularly regarding the hybridization work we've been working on for the past year and a half, and the next big step of making most abilities scale dynamically when applicable with offensive stats. To reiterate our goal, these passes have been done to help reduce the number of restrictions when engaging with an ability in your class kit or other skill line, helping you create a build that resonates with you based on what a skill offers rather than the stats you've picked. However, we do still believe stats should always play an important role in determining effectiveness of skills and how your build comes to life in the game. With the sheer number of them in-game, we found that the previous system of weapon versus spell damage, critical chance, and penetration were severely impending on one of the core mantras of the game: play the way you want. With other stats such as health, magicka, and stamina, and the recovery of those stats, we feel we have a large area to enforce limits of how often you can utilize skills as a defining factor of identity and build definition, rather than the potency of those skills as well. One of the main concerns we've seen is how classes will retain their identity moving forward with a new system of dynamic scaling. In our efforts to reduce penalties and restrictions, there always comes an air of homogenization with these changes, where more things feel similar in nature. Our goal is never to intentionally hurt strong identities, and we try to avoid it as much as possible while still improving your freedom in creation and expression. We believe that ability costs and how they play into your build will still be a factor in terms of how frequently you can use abilities. For example, it will be harder for a fully specialized stamina build to run a spammable ability like Puncturing Sweeps or Impale as frequently as a magicka build, unless they start to make decisions that detract from their specialization of stamina-based actions, thus beginning to change their identity. However, reducing the number of the builds in the world that focus on specialization is not as problematic, and in fact, something we would like to see more of. Moving the concept away of identifying only as magicka or stamina, and instead focusing on playstyle such as melee or range, and using skills of varying cost to realize those goals is something we are actively looking forward to. That said, we are aware of the reality that when trying to squeeze out every possible amount of efficiency in a build, there will always be choices that come out ahead, and we accept this reality as long as those choices aren't coming out ahead in almost every situation. Another area we've seen quite a bit of feedback on is Morph Diversity, and how the changes to hybridization impact which morph you want to pick. In previous updates, there were pretty clear options. If your ability morphed into a change in cost, it likely also changed in its scaling, leading to relatively binary morph options of just picking whichever ability met your primary resource. Now, the ability's potency is far less impacted by your stats, and instead focuses on what it costs and adds in functionality. This will be a vast improvement compared to many of the binary picks of before, where you didn't really have two options if you were a specialized build. But we do still know there are many morph options that don't hold a candle to one another. On that note, depending on specialization and the type of play you're focusing on, many morphs will remain rather contextual in nature, comparing more damage for a specific attack versus gaining an area of effect form of a major debuff may seem like a simple option for a high-end damage dealer, but outside of that context, a compelling choice is still seen. While this update won't conclude much of our hybridization work, aside from the work in progress consumable adjustments we mentioned in the original post, we know it will have knock-on effects to the game, and we're dedicated to following through as they pop up and evolve along with the game. Thanks for your time, and we hope this helped give some insight into where our focus has been. It is quite... Okay, so let's go over this piece by piece, and I'll break it down for myself in terms of analyzing it. And yeah, it did give an insight. I would agree that it does give some insight into how they think, how the developers think in regards to both the game direction, game philosophy, and the overall combat system. So they mentioned that they've been working on this for quite a while. I mean, I think there's been sense of knowing as players as well. It's not surprising for them to do this. Not at all. I don't know why a lot of people are surprised by the hybridization efforts, but it's been a long time coming. They've been doing this for quite a while, and anyone who has been reading patch notes is not surprised at all. They mention stats here in terms of critical chance, spell damage, weapon damage, penetration. I would say like penetration was the biggest one. I mean, especially when it comes to a stamina versus magicka heavy playstyle. And the fact that penetration hasn't yet been addressed is kind of weird to me, because stamina specs are still lacking on that, and that's pretty much the biggest obstacle at this point for stamina playstyle, at least within the raid context or group context. And because we can't just look at stats by themselves, we have to look at them in relation to other things, like what about medium armor passes, what about light armor passes? Those aren't quite hybridized fully as well. What about Mage's Guild? And so forth. I mean, is Mage's Guild hybridized? I mean, we don't know. Like, it's kind of like a pick and choose kind of thing here at this moment instead of a blanket hybridization. I think that's kind of what's throwing people off here, because if you're going to hybridize something, go all the way. I think I've seen a lot of sentiment in regards to that. Like, people are saying, well, why bother with, stamina or magicka? And I'll tell you why. Because it's an Elder Scrolls game. Right? I don't think that, because the Elder Scrolls games, pretty much all of them have health, magicka, and stamina. Right? So I don't know if we'll ever see that kind of stuff. So there is definitely some pull here in regards to, oh, this is an Elder Scrolls game. Still, behind this this appearance of, an MMO balancing, right? So I don't know. I really don't know, because that's a complicated area. And also I feel like this is kind of weird to mention that they're trying to enforce limits where they're also trying to encourage play how you want. But I think that's kind of like an off thing. And they do mention that, a lot of people have been pointing out that a lot of things are being homogenized to a degree. Especially if you're optimizing. I mean, you're pretty much going to be running the best things still. And they brought that up as well. That hey, we can accept it so long as the choices aren't coming out ahead in almost every situation. But that is meta. That has been meta for like years and years. Like, you can't just... This is not reality. Like, this is a version of a reality. If there's a skill with a tooltip that's higher, and there's absolutely no consequences for choosing that skill, especially within the group setting, because a group setting, people don't realize this, a group setting is completely different from a solo setting. If this was just a solo PvE game, cool. If this was a solo PvP game, or you can group up, cool. But there's so many different variables within this game that simply hybridization will not be able to completely address in any full form whatsoever. It's a very complicated game. It's a very complex game with a lot of moving parts. And I feel like they're just trying to dumb that concept down in terms of their perspective. I think there's gonna need to be a lot more work than just simply, having skills scale to the highest stats in terms of what they want to achieve. But anyway, moving on from that, it also feels like they're trying to lead a lot of players, they're trying to lead the horse to the water. And the old saying, you can lead a horse to water and make, but you can't make it drink. But it also feels like they're leading the horse to the water and trying to push the head of the horse into the water to make it drink. I don't know, this whole thing about play how you want. Right? You can play how you want right now. The base damage is so you can do whatever you want and you'll be fine. This is a question I ask myself all the time. Like, who are they balancing the combat for? Because most players don't care about the combat. Not a lot of people do. Most players, it's so contradictory, because they'll say, okay, this game's for people who like to enjoy the story. And that's a huge part of the reason why they made Overland and stuff like that very easy, even when you're not knowing everything. But on the other hand, then they try to make the combat more easier or more accessible, which is great, but at the same time, in a weird direction too, for players who may not even care. Whereas the players who do care, they see the problems with it. But I don't know. Some of the messaging here is kind of weird to me, in terms of meta, in terms of play how you want. But they do hit on the points that people have brought up so far, in regards to homogenization and skill morphs and so forth. Again, moving on to the morphs. Yeah, they obviously acknowledge there's going to be probably still a lot of morphs that will be the obvious choice over the other. But that simply doesn't address, like, all you did was give the car a new coat of painting rather than change the engine too much at this point. And I'm kind of worried what they said here, like, will conclude much of our hybridization work. I agree with the direction of the game so far, at least within the context of combat balancing, as a step in the process, but I don't agree with this being one of or the last step in terms of balancing the game. Again, it's just a very complicated thing for them to be like, okay, here's hybridization of skills, we'll probably hybridize some consumables next patch or something, like enchantments, as I mentioned here. But then it's like, it probably will not solve this issue of their perceived issue of meta, or class identities, or choice. And I don't know, it's a very interesting insight into how they're thinking about the game, and I don't think it meshes well with the actual reality of the game. But, you know, I am looking forward to next patch in terms of theory crafting and potentially opening up more build diversity. So that's a start, but I don't think this should be the end of it. I don't think this should be like, okay, well, we're done. Because it feels like they're saying that towards the end here. But that's pretty much it. That's all I want to talk about. I'll put the links down in the description or comments below for the original Update 33 combat preview and the Update 33 combat preview response by the combat dev. And I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe and have fun.